34 years have passed, yet the disappearance of Jonelle Matthews remains a hollow mystery. Authorities state that no remains were ever recovered and no arrests were made for decades. The investigation persists. Detectives now believe that modern forensic capabilities and fresh perspectives may finally bridge the gap to the truth. The sequence of events began on the night of December 20, 1984. A 12-year-old girl entered her home, removed her shoes, and settled near a space heater beside the family Christmas tree. She was energized by her school's holiday performance. She was safe. She was home. Within 60 minutes, she was gone. Her absence would endure for 35 years. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry, and no cries for help heard by neighbors. All that remained was a pair of small shoes placed neatly before an empty sofa. Outside the living room window, footprints marked the snow tracks that someone had attempted to obscure with a garden rake. Her name was Jonelle Matthews. The individual who allegedly took her life would spend the next 37 years living in the open. He sought political office, gave media interviews, and aggressively inserted himself into the very investigation designed to find him. But here is the chilling psychological reality. He could not maintain his silence, and his own obsessive words eventually tightened the noose. To grasp the gravity of what happened to Jonelle Matthews, one must first look at the person behind the case file. She was not a mere statistic or a cold case name. She was a child. She was vibrant, theatrical, and possessed a sense of humor that filled every room she entered. Jonelle was born on February 9, 1972, in Santa Barbara, California. Her life was marked by complexity before it even truly began. Her biological mother, Terry Verna Martinez, was a mere 13 years old at the time of the birth, a child raising a child. After a month of struggle, Terry made the ultimate sacrifice. She placed Jonelle for adoption. It was not a lack of love, but a profound desire for her daughter to have a life she could not provide. Jonelle found that life in Colorado. Within weeks, Jim and Gloria Matthews welcomed her into their home. Joined by their daughter Jennifer, the family was whole. They resided in Greeley, a quiet, community-focused town 60 miles north of Denver. It was a place where children rode bikes until the streetlights signaled the end of the day. In this town, front doors were often left unlocked. It was an environment where everyone was a familiar face. It was the last place one would expect a child to vanish from within her own walls. Jim Matthews served as the principal of Platte Valley Elementary. Gloria was employed at a local restaurant. They were active pillars of the Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. Jonelle was the family's heartbeat. Her friends remember her as theatrical, expressive, and deeply funny. She was a fixture in church performances, school choirs, and childhood sleepovers. She was a devoted fan of the boy band Menudo. To Jonelle, every small event was a grand occasion. As Christmas approached, she was buzzing with the electric anticipation of a 12-year-old. On December 20th, 1984, 5 days before the holiday, the trajectory of her life changed. Jonelle had been battling a respiratory cold. Most children would have taken the opportunity to stay home. Jonelle refused. She pleaded with her parents to let her attend school. She had gifts for friends and, more importantly, a performance. She had been chosen to sing with the Franklin Middle School Honor Choir at their annual holiday concert. She would not miss it for anything. Jim and Gloria relented, provided she returned home immediately to rest. Jonelle gave her word and departed. That evening, the concert was held at a local bank branch and was broadcast on a local cable network. Jonelle sang carols alongside her peers. Her friend, Deanna Ross, was by her side. They shared the stage and the laughter of the night. Afterward, Deanna's father, Russell, offered to drive Jonelle home. That commute was the final normal moment of her life. At approximately 8:15 p.m., Russell Ross stopped at 3243rd Avenue Court. Jonelle stepped out, said her goodbyes to Deanna, and wished them a Merry Christmas before walking toward the house. Russell and Deanna watched from the car, waiting for the signal. The foyer light flickered on. It was a silent contract often made in small towns. The light meant she was safely inside. Russell drove away. He had no way of knowing he was the last innocent person to see her alive. The following timeline is what investigators managed to reconstruct. At approximately 8:30 p.m., Jonelle answered a phone call at the residence. It was a teacher calling to notify Jim he would be absent the following morning. Jonelle took the message for her father. Manners, accountability, normality. This conversation was hauntingly routine, yet it remains the final proof of life for Jonelle Matthews. Then came the void. Within that 1-hour window, 8:30 to 9:30 p.m., the domestic peace was shattered. Violence, or whatever took place, moved with lethal speed. Jim Matthews spent that Tuesday night at a basketball game for his eldest daughter, Jennifer. Gloria was out of state, tending to her ailing mother. Consequently, when Jim's car entered the driveway around 9:30 p.m., he anticipated a quiet house where his 12-year-old was either unwinding by the television or drifting off on her favorite sofa cushion. He crossed the threshold. The air was warm, the furnace hummed, the television flickered with life. Upon the sofa, her preferred shawl was draped over the back as if just discarded. Her footwear remained neatly placed on the carpet, precisely where she always sat, positioned beside the holiday tree. The setting suggested she had been present seconds prior, but the girl was missing. The heat stayed on. The shoes retained their warmth. However, the owner was nowhere to be found. Initially, Jim resisted dread. Assuming she was with a neighbor, he began dialing numbers. The inquiries yielded nothing. By 10 p.m., Jennifer arrived back from her game to a growing unease. Entering the house, she shouted, "Hi, Jonelle. Jonelle, are you there?" The silence was deafening. Terror set in. Jim contacted the Greeley police. Law enforcement responded within 15 minutes. The evidence discovered on the perimeter of the home unsettled every responding officer. Distinct tracks marked the fresh snowfall beneath the living room glass. A voyeur had been stationed there, looking into the family's life. These impressions were not made by a youth. The size and the heavy placement suggested an adult with a purpose. The most chilling detail involves a garden tool. The intruder had retrieved a rake from the family's own garage to sweep away their tracks. The doors showed no damage. The interior betrayed no evidence of a physical confrontation. No glass was shattered. No screams reached the neighbors' ears. The abduction was silent, surgical, and cold-blooded. Utilizing the family's own equipment to conceal the crime suggests familiarity. This was no crime of opportunity. An observer had been calculating, biding time for that specific window where a 12-year-old girl was vulnerable and solitary. Authorities first entertained the standard theory. The child had fled of her own volition. Jim Matthews dismissed the notion immediately. He insisted to detectives that her life was currently filled with promise and joy. A sleepover was scheduled for the following morning. She was also rehearsing for a church holiday pageant, surrounded by festivities. It was the season of Christmas. A 12-year-old doesn't vanish 5 days before the holiday. They scoured her school locker and personal room. They found zero evidence of a planned departure. No farewell letters existed. No domestic friction was documented. As time stretched into weeks without a single sighting, the narrative of a runaway simply withered away. Suspicions shifted toward Jim Matthews. Police protocol dictates scrutinizing the inner circle first, a reality Jim accepted with total cooperation. He submitted to a polygraph conducted by the premier FBI interrogator for the western half of the United States. The examiner claimed he had failed. Undeterred by the result, Jim underwent a second test with local authorities. Consider the psychological weight. Your child is gone. You are drowning in fear, and the investigators are framing you as the predator. Despite the pressure, Jim remained consistent in his testimony. Eventually, he was ruled out, leaving the file empty. No persons of interest, no remains, no clues. They even shadowed Jonelle's biological mother, Terry Vera Martinez for several weeks. It became clear Terry was unaware her biological daughter had even vanished. There had been no communication for 10 years. It was another lead that vanished. Yet, the local population kept her name alive. Congregations held around-the-clock vigils. Thousands of posters were circulated nationwide, offering rewards for any sliver of information. Then, a specific marketing effort etched her likeness into the collective American psyche. Jonelle Matthews was a pioneer in a tragic way. Her face was among the first to appear on milk cartons. Let that sink in. During the mid-1980s, digital alerts and social media did not exist. Information moved at the speed of paper. Recovering children required placing their portraits on household staples items that stared back at families during their morning meals. Her image was distributed across every state. Eventually, her disappearance reached the highest office in the land. Come March 1985, President Ronald Reagan addressed the national epidemic of missing youths. He specifically named Jonelle. Despite this unprecedented attention from the commander-in-chief, the void remained. Tips led to dead ends. The investigation froze over. 5 years turned into a decade of stagnant silence. By 1994, 10 years after she went missing, her parents faced the agonizing task of seeking a legal declaration of death. Gloria Matthews reflected that they had endured 10 years of existence without a single explanation. 10 years passed without a motive or a single answer. In a public plea, she asked, "Doesn't anyone know anything? Can't someone just tell us where her body is so we can bury our daughter?" Silence was the only response. Then, in May of 1985, a faint glimmer of hope emerged. A fragment of a human scalp surfaced on farmland in Weld County. Authorities requested that Gloria examine the remains. Consider the weight of a mother being forced to inspect a piece of flesh to determine if it once belonged to her child. She complied, driven by maternal instinct. It was not Jonelle. That brief reprieve, however, was quickly consumed by the crushing weight of continued uncertainty. Remaining in Greeley became an impossible burden. The haunting memories, the vacant bedroom, and the unanswerable inquiries from neighbors proved too much. Eventually, Jim and Gloria departed. They served as missionaries in the Philippines before seeking a quiet retirement in Costa Rica. Jennifer, the older sister, started a family and relocated to Washington State. Yet, Gloria's search never truly ended. She scanned every crowd and every passing face. She confessed that in her sleep, Jonelle always found her way back. In every recurring dream, her daughter walked through the front door with a smile on her face. The actual door remained shut for 35 years. It was July 23, 2019. Workers were installing an oil and gas pipeline in a barren, isolated section of Weld County, roughly 15 miles southeast of Greeley. It began as routine labor until a heavy equipment operator struck something buried deep. Bones, human remains. Something more was there. A skull emerged with dental braces still fixed to the teeth, alongside remnants of a plaid skirt, a blouse, and a sweater vest. These garments matched exactly what Jonelle Matthews wore the evening she entered her home and vanished forever. Within 48 hours, the Weld County Coroner's Office confirmed the grim suspicion. These were the remains of Jonelle. Identification was established via dental records and DNA. The subsequent autopsy transformed a decades-old disappearance into a homicide inquiry. A lone gunshot wound to the head was found. She had not wandered away. She had not chosen to run. Her disappearance was not the work of a random drifter passing through. An individual led her from her home, drove her 15 miles into the wilderness, executed her with a single shot, and discarded her in the earth. She was discovered enveloped in a white bedsheet. Her jacket was half-zipped and inverted, with the sleeves drawn tight into the underarms. As investigators unfurled the sleeves, small hand bones tumbled out. Jonelle had died with her hands tucked beneath her armpits. A 12-year-old girl stood in a frozen field in December, trying to preserve warmth in her final seconds. Process that image for a moment. It is a haunting visualization that remains with you. To Jim and Gloria Matthews, this revelation brought a soul-crushing form of closure. Gloria had clung to a fragile hope that her daughter might still be alive somewhere in the world. That hope was permanently extinguished. Now, a different question haunted Greeley after 35 years. Who took the life of Jonelle Matthews? Weeks after the discovery, Greeley authorities released a statement that stunned the local community. A person of interest was identified. This was no anonymous wanderer or faceless felon. He was a man who had twice campaigned for the office of governor. For years, he provided interviews, composed letters, and submitted legal filings, consistently injecting references to Jonelle Matthews into his public life. Dana Pankey was his name. The path to his eventual capture remains one of the strangest chronologies in the annals of criminal history. In 1984, at the time of the disappearance, Pankey was a 33-year-old married man living in Greeley. His residence sat just 2 miles from the Matthews front door. He was a member of their congregation at the Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. On December 19th, the day before Jonelle vanished, Pankey was arrested at a bank for harassment and trespassing. His car dealership had failed. He was in the midst of a financial collapse. Strange events began to unfold in the immediate aftermath of the girl's disappearance. Angela Hicks, his former spouse, recalled him arriving home with an announcement that they were fleeing the city. They were to depart for Big Bear Lake, California, before dawn to see his parents for the holidays. Angela maintained the journey was entirely spontaneous. The departure was frantic and hurried. However, the most unsettling behavior manifested during their return journey. Pankey had prohibited all media within the home. Radio, television, and print were forbidden in what he deemed a pious household. Angela was denied even the right to drive. Yet, as they returned early to Greeley, Pankey suddenly commanded her to activate the car radio. He was searching specifically for the news. He hunted for reports on a missing child, the same child he later alleged he never knew existed. Angela testified to scanning frequencies for hours, while Pankey obsessed over any mention of Jonelle Matthews. Upon their arrival back in Greeley, bypassing their driveway, he drove to a shop to secure every local periodical available. He then forced Angela to recite every column regarding the girl's disappearance aloud, 3 times each. Behavior grew increasingly erratic. Within days of returning, he donned heavy coveralls and boots to begin excavating the earth in their front garden. He claimed a septic failure, despite the system being brand new that year. Angela had observed no signs of any such malfunction. That same week, a vehicle parked on their land was consumed by a mysterious fire. Angela found him standing over the incinerated car with a spade, a sequence including the travel, the media fixation, and the digging. A car reduced to ash, unprompted excavation, and news obsession. All these anomalies converged within 7 days of a 12-year-old girl vanishing. It was then that he made a move that defies the typical logic of a guilty mind. He initiated contact with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 1 month after the girl vanished, he entered the police station claiming to be a minister with information from a confession. He alleged he possessed the key to the mystery. However, his cooperation carried a heavy price: total immunity from prosecution. Law enforcement declined his terms, but they recorded his name and began a silent watch. These narratives serve as a grim reminder of the shadows within communities and the long road toward finding the truth. We continue to examine these deep scars left on families and the pursuit of accountability in cases that have long since gone cold. The search for answers often leads to even darker revelations. Focus must return to him, for his actions over the subsequent 3 decades are genuinely inexplicable in criminal history. Following that initial encounter with the authorities, he relocated his family far from the original scene. They drifted through various states before settling in Idaho in the late 1980s. Yet, the memory of the missing girl remained. In Idaho, he turned toward the public eye, launching multiple campaigns for sheriff, council, and the governorship. every attempt ended in defeat, securing only 1.4% of the vote in 2018. But politics was a distraction. Behind the facade of political ambition, he became an obsessive writer, flooding the desks of attorneys and the Supreme Court with a relentless stream of petitions. Hidden within these documents, in cases unrelated to a missing child in Colorado, were sudden and chilling references to the victim. When investigators eventually searched his residence, they recovered over 1,000 separate documents mentioning the girl by name. In a 1999 filing, he claimed a prior legal issue was an attempt to force him into becoming an informant. Then came a statement that caused the air in the room to turn cold. He wrote that he lived in fear of the death penalty should he ever disclose the location of her remains. Why would a man without blood on his hands fear execution for helping police find a buried child? Unless he was involved. A manuscript was also penned. Recovered during the search, the book Graveyards seethed with malice toward the church the victim's family attended. It was the same congregation that had cast him out years before the family had even joined the fold. In the late 1990s, he explicitly told an officer that he had buried human remains within Colorado. His own legal filings described him as a prime target in a capital murder inquiry. He characterized himself as a material witness while maintaining a singular, repetitive demand. Grant me immunity. He offered a trade, a confession for a deal. No deal was struck, but every word was noted. Every utterance was being methodically archived, weaving a net of evidence that would take 30 years to tighten. He possessed a specific detail that belonged only to the killer, and he had been unable to keep it silent. Consider the footprints in the snow that someone had tried to erase. That detail was never disclosed to the public. It was classified as protected evidence, a secret shared only by the perpetrator and the investigators on the scene. Nevertheless, he mentioned that Rake repeatedly during his voluntary interactions with the police. His former wife even found a discarded note stating that the snow outside the house had been raked. Even his legal counsel would struggle to explain this, as there is no innocent path to knowing about that rake. There was one final secret, an accusation from his own kin that he desperately hoped would stay buried. While on a recorded line from jail, he received word that his cousin had passed away. Upon hearing the allegations, his immediate concern was whether his cousin's claims about him stalking schools would finally vanish. His sister offered a tentative yes, noting that no one else had echoed those specific accusations. Investigators later highlighted a chilling proximity. The cousin resided just 3 blocks from Franklin Middle School, the exact campus Jonelle Matthews attended. Several months into the search for the missing girl, a clergyman at Pankey's own church announced a divine revelation. Jonelle would be discovered alive and returned to her family. The room filled with hope. They bowed their heads. They believed. But Stephen Pankey erupted. He branded the man a false prophet and had to be forcibly ejected from the sanctuary. Why such absolute certainty from an innocent bystander? He was enraged by the hope of her survival, perhaps because he knew the truth was much darker. On October 12, 2020, a Weld County grand jury issued an 8-page indictment against Stephen Dana Pankey. The counts were severe: murder in the first degree and kidnapping in the second degree. 36 years had passed. Finally, a reckoning for the fate of that child was at hand. Authorities took the 69-year-old into custody in Idaho, denying him bail. The man who spent decades craving attention and writing frantic letters, campaigning for office, and force-feeding himself into the narrative of this case, was confined to a cell, awaiting his return to Colorado. Meanwhile, Jim and Gloria Matthews traveled back to Greeley. Sitting in that courtroom, they stared into the eyes of Stephen Pankey, seeking the closure that had eluded them since 1984. The trial opened in October 2021. The prosecution faced a void. No genetic evidence existed. Nothing. 35 years in a Colorado field had stripped Jonelle's remains and clothing of any usable biological traces. No prints, no weapon. The state's burden rested entirely on the pattern of Pankey's own words and erratic choices. In the end, that psychological profile proved more than sufficient. Roughly 60 witnesses testified. They detailed nearly 40 years of Pankey's disturbing, self-incriminating obsession, the endless letters, the legal filings, and over 1,000 documents recovered from his private residence, the non-public details about a raked yard, and the recorded jail calls where he used coded language to discuss firearms after learning she died of a gunshot. Yet the most damaging testimony came from his former wife, Angela Hicks. Angela stood before the jury and recounted everything. The sudden, frantic journey to California, the fixated monitoring of the radio, the articles he made her read repeatedly, the digging, the car fire. Then, she described a chilling moment from 2008, 24 years after the disappearance. Pankey's own son had been killed. At the memorial, as he looked upon his son's ashes, Angela saw him lean in, kiss the urn, and mutter, "I hope God didn't allow this to happen because of Jonelle Matthews." At his son's final goodbye, Jonelle was the name on his lips. Angela also mentioned a discarded note she found. In Pankey's writing, it noted that the snow outside the Matthews home had been raked, a detail never shared with the public, a secret kept by a man who claimed to know nothing. She spoke of his total, suffocating control over her life. He prohibited media and music. He denied her the right to drive. But when Jonelle vanished, the walls came down. He needed the world to tell him what people knew about his actions. Ultimately, Pankey provided the most damaging evidence himself. Ignoring every legal warning, he insisted on testifying. 2 days of wandering, contradictory, and bizarre statements followed. He confessed to decades of deception. The stories about his father-in-law and the hidden body were lies. The confession to a pastor was a fabrication. He admitted to inventing information out of a sense of pure spite. He told the jury, and I quote, "I made a lot of stuff up out of bitterness for things that happened to me at Sunnyview and for things that happened to me at the police department." Transitioning to his motive, he added, "It was pure hatred on my part." His defense, "I am a liar, not a killer." District Attorney Michael Rourke remained unmoved. He confronted the defendant, asking, "Was Jonelle begging for her life when you shot her in the forehead?" Pankey offered no reply. His own lawyer later conceded to the jury, "Steve Pankey is kind of a jerk, it's a fact. Being unlikable," he argued, "was not proof of murder." The jury deliberated, eventually reaching a deadlock. They found him guilty only on a single count of providing false statements to the police. A deadlock. The jury stalled on the counts of murder and kidnapping, mistrial declared. For the Matthews family, it was another crushing blow. The state refused to walk away. A second trial was scheduled for October 2022. Round 2 brought a different leverage. Patrick Callas. He was a new witness, an inmate from the Weld County Jail. Callas had shared a protective custody pod with Pankey from January to April 2021. They bonded over faith, shared prayers, Bible study. Pankey usually kept the details of his legal battle buried. The silence broke when Pankey approached Callas, claiming a need for absolution. He requested a joint prayer. Callas obliged. Then came the admission, "I did some bad things." When asked if he meant Jonelle, Pankey offered a silent nod. Callas pressed further, asking if he took her life. Pankey's response was cryptic. "That's between me and God." But the revelations didn't stop there. Callas later testified about a disturbance. Another inmate hammered on the wall, signaling him to listen. Standing by his cell glass, Callas heard Stephen Pankey utter a sentence that defied any claim of innocence. "She was dead before I crossed the railroad tracks." Following the initial mistrial, Callas sent a letter to the district attorney. He explained his previous silence as a product of the shared religious bond he had formed with Pankey. To speak felt like betrayal, but seeing the first trial fail to reach a verdict forced his hand. His conscience took over. October 31st, 2022, Halloween. The jury returned to the courtroom with the decision: guilty. Felony murder. Second-degree kidnapping with a lethal weapon. False reporting to the police. He was cleared of premeditation. Yet the felony murder conviction carried the exact same weight in the eyes of the law. Life behind bars. Parole eligibility begins after 20 years. His first chance at freedom, 2042. He will be 91. Before the final sentence fell, the family found their voice. Jennifer Mogensen stood first. Jonelle's sister reminded the court of the scale of the loss. 12,634 days had passed since the disappearance. A husband who never knew his sister-in-law. A son who never met his aunt. The family tree was severed. The childhood friction of 1984 never evolved into a mature friendship. Pankey had erased that future. Jim Matthews followed. His words to Stephen Pankey brought a heavy silence to the entire room. Staring at his daughter's killer, he spoke. "Your actions have obsessed you. Your conscience refused to let the memory fade. You have been a prisoner within your own mind." Then, Jim took an unexpected turn. "You call yourself a Christian. There is still hope. It isn't too late for a true confession. The gates of heaven aren't closed yet. It's not too late." Steve Pankey, God is waiting. A broken father offering grace. Gloria Matthews, however, found no such room for forgiveness. At the post-sentencing press conference, her stance was clear. "I cannot forgive the way he ended Jonelle's life. Only God forgives evil." And this was evil. Given his final word, Pankey addressed the court. "I am a Christian. I will be in heaven. I am innocent. This is not justice for Jonelle." As it stands today, Stephen Pankey is incarcerated at the Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Ordway, Colorado. He intends to appeal, clinging to his innocence. But the 12,634 days of silence are done. Jonelle Matthews is no longer an enigma, no longer just a grainy photo on a milk carton. She was a child who was loved, stolen, and eventually returned. 35 years to find her, 37 to convict him. Her family never surrendered, and Greeley, Colorado, never forgot the girl who vanished 5 days before Christmas. Jonelle Matthews was 12. She had a passion for song. She cherished the holidays and her family. She was owed a lifetime she never received. Now, your thoughts. Given the lack of DNA evidence, do you believe the jury reached the correct conclusion regarding Pankey? Was that prison confession real, or was Patrick Callas hunting for a bargain? One question remains particularly haunting. Had Pankey remained silent for those 37 years, would justice have ever found him? Leave your thoughts below. I will see you in the next investigation. The heartbreaking saga of Jonelle Matthews is a profound reminder that justice has no expiration date and that the truth possesses a relentless voice. Her story offers vital lessons on community, the weight of a guilty conscience, and the enduring power of a family's love. The echo of a guilty conscience. The most chilling lesson is that evil cannot remain silent. Stephen Pankey lived in the open for 37 years, yet he was a prisoner within his own mind, obsessively injecting himself into the investigation. His 1,000-plus documents and non-public knowledge of a raked yard prove that secrets eventually tighten their own noose. The sacredness of childhood safety. Jonelle was a vibrant 12-year-old who felt safe in her own home, sitting by the Christmas tree in her stocking feet. Her abduction, surgical and cold-blooded, serves as a grim warning to never take community safety for granted. It reminds us that we must remain the heartbeat of our neighborhoods, looking out for one another long after the holiday lights fade. The Marathon of Hope. For 12,634 days, the Matthews family refused to surrender. Jonelle was more than a grainy photo on a milk carton. She was a child who was loved and eventually returned. Their journey teaches us that persistence is a form of justice. Even when the trail freezes over for decades, the truth can still be unearthed by those who refuse to let a name dissolve into silence.